We've got a great room of people where there's a lot of experience in the room as well. So in order to make the best use of the time, we'll go with some brief speaker introductions in a minute. Then we're going to go into a panel discussion session where we'll use some of the insights that you in the room have shared with us in advance. So we'll try and hone in on some of the big questions. And then we'll open it up to the floor for Q&A.
I'm going to base my answers on scaling to the East Coast. That's because most of our companies do that. I'm sure that we're going to hear lots of views from the audience, but California has its own ecosystem, which is a total full stack ecosystem.
We're kind of pulled into the US market, I would say. So started noticing about 30% of our revenue was coming from the US with no sales presence there, or any presence out there in terms of physical presence. And so post Series A started to really look at how do you start resourcing that, who do we start hiring, where do we start hiring.
William McQuillan, I'm one of the partners at Frontline Ventures. So Frontline Ventures is a venture capital fund, and really a big part of our DNA is all about crossing the Atlantic. So we have two different strategies. We have a pre-seed seed stage fund that invests in European companies and helps them cross into the US and North America. And we have a growth stage fund that invests in US companies and helps them come from the US into Europe. This topic is one that is right at the heart of our firm.
So we asked everyone in the room in advance to share your big questions. And I think broadly, they started to fall into three categories. So I'm going to try and address a part of each of those categories.
So I went back to my team and I said, we are going to change every single word that we've written. Now, bear in mind, we've got about 20,000 articles. We've got thousands of workouts. We've got created all of our content as in a way, all Americanized.
One thing we did in particular was we joined an accelerator program specifically for HR tech companies called People Tech Partners. And through that program, you're basically exposed to 200 or so people leaders, HR leaders. And they pick 4 or 5 companies each quarter. And then you appoint 2 kind of advisors to go through that who are either ex or current chief people officers.
At the time, Zynga was larger than Facebook. Yeah, it's a company that made probably $2 billion of revenue. That was before Facebook activated, revenue generation. And there was a weekly call between Zuckerberg and the CEO of Zynga, Mark Pincus.
Yeah, I mean, the key nuance that Stephane really points out there is that there isn't an exact way. And, when I look at B2B companies, which is what Frontline focuses on, and you could look at a large enterprise sales company and say, okay, that's the way they should go over. And then you could look at a company that's targeting freelancers or SMEs, and you potentially create a very different strategy for them. And you could look at a company in the health tech B2B space, look at a company in the gaming B2B space and say, the location, the type of person you hire is very, very different when you go. So I think the key thing that I get across to people in the room and anyone else who you're advising is the key questions you need to be asking is, when is the right time for us to go? Where should we go? What sort of investment should we be putting into this? What sort of senior resource are we going to be taking?
The message that I got is to all of your planning and the preparation that is essential, basically double it. So double everything, like double the time it takes, double the money that you need, double the salary that you need to hire that first go-to-market hire. Some of our CEOs are astounded when the recruiter will say, okay, this is your first go-to-market hire and their annual comp will be $600,000, $300 plus 300, and they want 1%. And it takes them 3 times when they lose candidates to realize actually that was not a joke. Typically in B2B software, the first hire is go-to-market. And typically that's someone who can basically win clients and new customers. And typically that needs to be somebody who can do that and has got a successful track record of doing that in a breakthrough product. So a product that has no share of voice in the market.
You need to be ready. You need to have a pretty robust platform before you go, because it's going to be a massive drag on your resources, not only financial, but also in terms of time, attention, traveling, to your point. And so if you don't have somebody running the shop properly at base and making sure the core business is healthy, I would not recommend you to go to the US. I think it can be it can introduce existential risk into your company, which you probably don't want.
If the founder goes over, it substantially increases the likelihood of success. The problem with that, though, as people have pointed out, is that if the founder goes over, that means that kind of the whole house at home really isn't running itself properly, especially if there's only one founder. And so what we find is the nuance that I give as an extra is that European companies either move almost immediately. So out of the C brand, they immediately move, and their focus is no longer home Europe. Their focus tends to be the US immediately from day one, and that tends to work quite well.
Absolutely. If the founders can, they don't want to relocate, but if they can rotate so that there's always some native talent in the office. So if you have 2 or 3 founders, if they can each spend a couple of months a year, they split week by week, and then you take 2 or 3 of the early employees who actually it might be the right time for them to move on because they're really good at inception and they have horizontal skills as opposed to vertical skills. That might be an opportunity for a second cycle for them because it's gonna be a startup like the startup it was when they joined the company. And they can bring the culture, they can champion the culture, and they can accelerate the setup of the US operation.
I think that the key, having spoken to other founders as well, is that you don't want it to feel like a them and an us type situation, and that because the founder's sitting in the UK, that they're not important. And so hence a lot of my traveling, spending time with those current kind of 2 employees is to make that point known that the US is a super important market. I'm spending a lot of my time out there. And we're going to be on the journey that Mel's just been on in terms of how we can infuse that into our marketing, because the messaging does need to kind of change and localize for that. But from a company culture perspective, I do think it's really important they don't feel like the forgotten child, if particularly it's the C-suite and everyone's in the UK.
I was just going to say that the hiring culture is really different. I mean, it's like we speak English, but it's just so it's completely different as an experience. And I loved what you said earlier, Raj. The directness is affronting.
The US loves an underdog. In Europe is traditionally more traditional and conservative in almost across the continent. The US was built on the idea of the underdog. And so when it comes to like selling enterprise sales, when you're trying to sell to a salesperson in the US, the lead times are shorter, the account sizes are larger, they're much more likely to want to take a risk on a new startup than they are for enterprise companies in Europe. And so while yes, the investment is high, the costs of the salespeople or the team there, the flip side is that the culture can go in your favor when you're selling, because the Americans love an underdog story. It's not the obvious just by IBM, and that can really go in startups' favor.
The risk taking is completely different. So whether you're fundraising or whether you're selling into enterprise, I think they're willing to take a risk. And I think the risk averse nature of the UK and generally in Europe is, I don't understand how many South Africans that's like as bullshit as there. So for me, it's like this is much more normal for me to be direct. So I didn't find that a problem, but I think talking to US companies and they just the risk averse just doesn't happen like it does in the UK.
We've had tremendous success by hiring or asking chairs to join the business, and those chairs are based in the US. But the trick is to find a chair who's also worked in Europe, rather than having kind of that holistic view of the US as a single entity. They're able to help you bridge. They understand what it is to bridge the gap between a European culture and a US culture, and that has been amazing mentorship, or provided amazing mentorship.
It's probably not pitching ourselves correctly. So when we were doing our Series A, just how you pitch to US investors is just so different. And it took me a few times of pitching and realizing that probably not landing properly. And it's so uncomfortable. You literally have to just be so forward. You literally have to it's weird. And you literally have to kind of put yourself, and as if you're like playing this, it's a game. Is it actually a game? But that for me was a big mindset shift. And when I started talking to some founders that had raised money successfully in the US and how and why, then running through my pitch with them and talking to some of the advisors, and literally I had a completely different pitch afterwards.
The single most important thing you do as you scale is recruitment. And so, typically the downside of bringing the wrong person is much higher than the upside of bringing the right one. It's very sad, but that's often the case, because if you scale quickly, that person is going to be hiring the next one within weeks, and then the next one and the next one. And so if you bring in somebody who's not culturally aligned, you will create, a silo of people who are not culturally aligned. And that might have, very bad impact on your company.
I cannot emphasize enough the point about pitching. I'd say the average 17-year-old American pitches with more confidence than the average second time exited founder in Europe. I mean, it's genuinely mind-blowing, the difference in confidence and what they put in their pitch decks.